Okay, the meeting's been called to order. First order of business is minutes from the previous meeting.
I move to approve.
Is there a second?
I second.
I have a comment.
Okay. Let's go ahead and get a second and then we can have
I believe
Okay.
I heard Commissioner Stockamp second.
Yeah, I second
Thank you.
approval.
yeah, I'm getting a delayed feedback on this end by about 10 seconds. So it makes it interesting to keep track of where everything's at.
Just like turn your volume off so you don't have to listen to
Well, the
yourself.
problem is that with the volume off, then I can't hear the other commissioners.
Ask one of them to say something.
Yeah, I'm getting okay, then I'll turn my volume off. Feedback on this end by about 10 seconds. So it's interesting to keep track of where everything's at. All right. So it's been moved and seconded. Commissioner Altman, you had comments?
My comment is for the minutes from the last meeting. The minutes said a commissioner made a motion, a commissioner seconded, and the commissioners weren't named. And I went back. I don't know if anybody else made that note, but I had asked Tracy to re-look at it, or I would re-look at it, but I wasn't able to get back into my email. The Commissioner Kiris made the motion. Commissioner Williams seconded the motion for the meeting last month to accept the changes to the text amendment. And I just wanted that to be clear and noted in the record.
Okay, thank you. And I guess, yeah, going forward, I assume we just need to make sure that the minutes reflect at least the maker of the motion. I think Robert's rules typically doesn't require the seconder to be identified, but certainly the maker. Oh,
Your planning manager, Will Groves, and
certainly.
maker of the minutes. So one of the things that we've done historically, Tracy went through these and watched it and created minutes based on watching the video, and she'd have to pause and start over. And so usually it took her roughly twice the amount of time that the actual meeting went to create the minutes. And so we've switched over to the automated transcripts are made, and then we use AI software to create summaries of it. And and where it can identify the commissioner, it requires that where it can identify the commissioner, it can tell who is speaking by context, it will name you. But where it can't, this time it decided to use the A commissioner setup with that. And so the notion with these minutes, as we talk to kind of legal counsel, is that these are meant to be provided as a kind of an overview, that the official record is the video that's available online. We could in the future avoid the A commissioner, to say that a motion was made, or I recognize too, when I was looking at it, like the A commissioner is awkward and it feels like we're not saying the name of the person, but in context, that's going to put somebody back into looking at the videos and, trying to find where in the timestamp that happened. And so the effort associated with that is significant. So I just wanted to check in to see if you've got, some significant concern with, or if there's a Robert Rules of Order that you're aware of, that the minutes don't identify the motion maker specifically, or if you've got concerns with that. At the top of the minutes, it says, of course, that the video is the actual transcript, and this is provided for orientation to that video.
Okay. What are your thoughts? You good with that? Commissioner Kiris?
I would like the commissioners who are making the motions to be identified. I think that's a reasonable thing to have in the minutes. I think that in the interest of staff time, it makes sense for us to read what the AI has generated and then go back and say, as Commissioner Altman has now, it was Commissioner Kiris who made the motion, it was Commissioner Williams who seconded, and then we should discuss that. And if someone disagrees, like if I'm like, no, I didn't make that motion, then we should watch the video and figure out what actually happened. But I think that it's, if you're a member of the public and you're wanting to know who made what motions and who voted, you could discover that information fairly quickly looking at the minutes, or you'd have to watch the entire meeting, just as staff would have to watch the entire meeting. So I think just since we're all here at the meetings and we're voting to approve the minutes, I think maybe it should fall on us to add information in that the AI is missing. But I would prefer that as opposed to just leaving that information out.
Yeah, I think, we've been uneven on whether we've said that, that there was, specifically who made a motion. So it sounds like that it'll be interesting to get the feedback from all of you. But if that's important to you and you're willing to fill in that role, of course, these minutes go out to you early. And so to the extent you provide that information, certainly we can cycle that back. But that also, that will, at some point, Tracy will be watching this meeting now, trying to find where you identified who was back in it, right? It loops a little bit, but it's not as bad as watching the whole video.
But couldn't we just agree as a commission? Like, why does Tracy have to watch the video? Couldn't it just be like, well, Commissioner Altman is essentially moving to amend the minutes to add those names in. I could second that motion. We could all vote unanimously that that's what we want to do. Why would anyone have to then go back
The
and watch?
minutes then have to be physically altered, right? So the information has to be carried back to Tracy. Tracy has to make the edits. The edits have to come back to you as
But why would she have to watch the movie? That's the part I'm like
either
not following.
Well, she's going to have to be, the information you're providing has to get back to her in some way. So, we could take that as notes in some way.
We could email her in advance, I would think. Yeah.
It's also something reasonably that we could do.
So what I would suggest going forward
Yeah.
is I'll try to be a little more diligent, that when we're recognizing a motion, that I'll try to specify
That'll help a lot.
who made and seconded the motion, but that we're voting on,
Yeah.
or that we're moving forward on. And that way,
I, Commissioner Williams,
hopefully it'll make it easier
move
for
to
everyone.
approve the minutes.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I think that's a really good idea.
Yeah,
but-
that'll definitely.
And we all need to make sure we proofread the minutes also. That doesn't
Yeah, I
mess it up.
appreciate it. And we're in a brave new world here of trying to get, these, our robot overlords to make minutes for us. So, definitely this is an open topic for discussion about how it works and what we do. So appreciate your,
So on this particular motion, who made this one?
Tony.
I,
So it was
Commissioner Williams, move to approve the
Commissioner
minutes.
Stockamp seconded it. And
Correct.
so is there any further discussion?
Yes, I would like to just throw out that whenever we do make a motion, we just say our name maybe to make it easier versus having to let Tracy know. So I, Commissioner Williams, move to approve the minutes, and AI is able to capture that. And then Commissioner Stockamp says, I second it. And so we've captured both without having to email Tracy.
That sounds a whole lot easier. If when you're making a motion, you just identify yourself as making the motion, and same with the second, and AI can catch up with us, and that should work.
And
Yeah.
one day they will recognize our voices.
So just to clarify, what I was suggesting with the email thing, is that if there is an error in the minutes, it would be a good idea for us to email Tracy. And then if it's something like that we can do to help avoid having her watch the video as by voting as a group. Yes, we all remember who made the motion. I think that would be ideal. That way she doesn't have to watch the
That
whole
makes sense.
meeting. Yeah. But the idea here, at least as long as I've been on the commission, is if there's an error in the minutes, it doesn't mean that the person necessarily has to rewatch the whole video. It just means that we need to clarify among ourselves if the minutes are incorrect, then we all agree they're incorrect and they need to be amended, we amend them. If there's a disagreement, then obviously we have to go back to the video to find out what happened and what's correct. But
I agree.
I don't think that anyone needs to watch the video unless there's some sort of disagreement about what happened.
Because, yeah, quite frankly, yeah, the amendment or the adjustments will be made as we adapt by vote when we're making the motion to accept. So with that, Commissioner Altman.
I wouldn't mind as vice chair taking notes just for these types of things when we make motions and second and vote on them. And then at the end of the meeting, or, next week or whatever, I could just send to Tracy just the summary of any motions that were made so that
Yep.
AI is weird. I don't like AI.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
a lot of
yeah.
AI for-
Sounds great. You're hereby appointed. All right, thank you. So with that, is there any other comments with regard to the minutes?
So
Great.
are we amending the minutes? Like what's going on with the lack of naming of commissioners from this particular set of minutes.
Is
we're
that for
discussing.
this minutes or the previous set?
Well, we have two, the last meeting and the meeting previous, we are approving, and, I made one correction to Tracy, just a typo in the first meeting. It doesn't change the context of it. And then for the last meeting we had, I would like the minutes amended to say who made the motion. So that would be you made the motion and Commissioner Williams seconded the motion.
Okay,
So do we have to vote on that or anything, or?
so that would, so what we'll vote on is the minutes as amended. So all those in favor, say aye.
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 And the chair votes aye. Minutes are approved. Now we have public comment. Mr. Bryant, you're up. Please state your name and address for the record.
Okay, my name is Greg Bryant. It's 19202 Choctaw Road, Bend, Oregon. And I'm here to talk about, I'd like for you guys to do a community plan for Deschutes River Woods. Deschutes River Woods is the third largest community in the county. It's also the 78th largest community in the state. And it's, I believe it's long overdue to have some sort of a community vision. And they had, you know, per their interpretation of 660-22-0020, counties may amend these designations as circumstances change over time. In other words, they're talking about that they had they looked at items back on October the 28th, 1994, and had a whole list of items, and our store was there, but that was it. And they only based it upon that store. And at that time, at 1990, our population was and Deschutes River was over 2,300 people anyway. So it was probably about, you know, third largest at that time. So I'd like to have some sort of a community plan like you did with Tumalo and also Terrebonne.
So just, are you guys zoned for as a unincorporated community?
It's unincorporated community, yes. Well, it wasn't, see, what they based it upon was on that 1994 basis. And what I'm saying is that says counties may amend these designations as circumstances change. I'm saying 30 years later, things change. I mean, what are you gonna do? Wait for 100 years or something like that, or what?
So if I'm hearing you correct, what you're asking that is you be designated as a unincorporated community for planning.
Right, unincorporated in that designation, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and then also so that we could also if you could also do a community plan for us.
Okay. Well, maybe Peter can help us out with what would be involved in that process and work with you guys on, and maybe, or Will, on what that process might be.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Again, Will Groves, your planning manager. So I've been speaking with Greg.
That's good. Go ahead.
Yeah, been speaking with him extensively about this. The section that deals with unincorporated communities is a little bit unusual in that it does acknowledge that there is some possibility to expand unincorporated communities. And it talks about for urban unincorporated communities like Sun River, it explains how you would do that. And it does not explain how you would do that for, you know, either creating a new one or expanding things that are like Tumalo or Terrebonne, for example. And in consultation with the LCD, they said that this, you know, at least in the conversations to date, that it seems like it could be theoretically possible, but there's, you know, some significant kind of questions and concerns about if it is possible. So the reason we're here this evening is I had spoken to Greg about the possibility that really we'd reached a point that even the research that I was doing is starting to turn into, you know, a significant county undertaking, you know, before I start asking legal for analysis and memorandum. And because he had indicated that he would not be here during the work plan, My understanding, and, jump in if I've got this wrong, is that he would like to advocate as part of the work plan that the county continue to investigate this possibility of what it would look like to have Deschutes River Woods put in this category. And I think, it's not clear if that's going to be a short adventure where DLCD or legal indicates relatively quickly that this is precluded as a matter of law. If it isn't precluded as a matter of law, then there's a question, that follows after that, which is, is this something that the Board of County Commissioners wants to invest resources in? Is it something the community supports? So one of the things that we had talked about too was, kind of what the goals were of having it designated as an unincorporated community. And, if there was kind of other ways to get at some of those things. The early indications I've gotten from DLCD is that they, at least preliminarily said, look, if the conditions, we looked at this back in 1993 and again in 1997, came to the conclusion that the Deschutes Riverwood store area, that 5-acre parcel, was, something that you wouldn't typically see in rural areas, and thus it got a special designation. But then that in turn, we took it back to what's called a rural commercial zone. So it doesn't even have an unincorporated community designation. So I think what they're thinking about is they're like, hey, look, if you've done a lot of urban style improvements over the past, since 1993, there might be some merit to seeing this community in a different way. I'm not certain that, given that the lotting pattern hasn't changed and the usage pattern hasn't changed a lot, although the density of residences has continued to fill over time as construction's occurred, if that they would see this as a possibility. So and again, forgive me if I'm getting ahead of you, but I think the notion is that this is testimony in advance of the work session and a request that that resources be allocated by the board to at least explore, the legality of this. And then, kind of, is this something that, if it is legal, is worth putting effort into, and does it, result in the goals that the community is looking for from that? So, definitely, this is sort of a preview for a future hearing on the work session that Greg would be unable to attend due to his schedule.
Because I'm leaving on Tuesday, and I won't be back until the 20th of March.
Okay. So I guess the question is it anything we need to do, or is this just a advanced testimony that you will have up
nothing
for
you need to do
discussion when the
today.
time
So,
comes?
we'll bring this back up as we come into the work session. We'll note that, hey, that we've received prior testimony in this, and then it's the planning commission then makes recommendations to the board about what, should be on the work plan for the year. You could, or you might or might not advocate that this is a thing that you're interested in, and assign some relative priority to it, as you do with all items before the board in the work plan.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And just let you know, I have presented this to the commissioner twice.
Okay, thanks.
If I may,
It-
just to offer some value added comments, and I think Will's being incredibly diplomatic, and I want to recognize Greg Bryan as a community advocate for Deschutes River Woods. I think it's going to be helpful before you go on vacation to describe what the goals are of a community plan. Is it sewering? Is it retail? What is the basis of that community conversation? Because right now, Deschutes River Woods is undoubtedly a rural residential subdivision, and there hasn't been any change since it was really platted to that built environment. The other thing that I want to caution, and we have assistant legal counsel here, and I'm not at all asking her to express this particular opinion, but Deschutes County, in my opinion, as a department head, as a director for CDD, we want to be mindful of providing legal advice on behalf of a community group that is thinking about becoming an unincorporated community potentially, and really pushing, I say this sincerely and tactfully, pushing the interpretations of administrative rules. This law has been in place for decades, and this is unprecedented and a matter of first impression. And whether or not the Department of Land Conservation Development wants to provide the backstop for this, this is an unprecedented contemplation. And I'm just stating for the record that I'm not comfortable making a request for county council to provide the legal analysis potentially as to whether or not a region like Deschutes River Woods can qualify. And that may be ultimately something that the board will want to contemplate, but typically I see it almost analogous, and this is imperfect because it's not necessarily a land use question, is I also see it analogous to wanting to be an incorporated city. When you want to be an incorporated city, and we experienced this last year, the city of Mountain View, the burden was on the petitioner to demonstrate that they qualified, they had the requisite signatures, and they had the requisite means financially and through their own capability to demonstrate that they could be a city and comply with the requisite statewide planning goals within a 20-year period. And so I'm not at all trying to throw or suggest that I'm throwing cold water on Greg's respectful request through the work plan to have the Planning Commission consider his current request and any supplemental materials that provide the basis for it. We will undoubtedly want the Planning Commission's input, and we will carry that input or recommendation to the board and have a similar conversation later in the spring. But I'm just acknowledging that there is a role for the county to evaluate such a request, and such a request would likely be controversial, and I'm not sure. We want to be careful that we want to be careful that we're remaining independent and neutral on such an issue, just in the ways that we had to take for an incorporated request to become a municipality. So I'm just providing a little bit more color commentary. I appreciate Will's professionalism in engaging Mr. Bryant, and I really respect Mr. Bryant's passion to look at Deschutes River Woods creatively and look at opportunities that may not presently be available. I'll close by saying this is incredibly complicated, and roles and responsibilities will likely need to be determined. So I'll close there.
And I appreciate those comments, because I was going to offer my non-legal suggestion that have a good land use attorney take a good hard look at what the laws currently state while the legislature is in session. And if there are some minor edits to statute that need to be done in order to move forward with this, if there's no clear direction now is the time you should be in Salem making sure you create a direction that's something that we can actually look at. And Stephanie?
Go ahead.
Hi, Stephanie Marshall, Senior Assistant Legal Counsel. I don't have a lot to add that hasn't already been stated. And Commissioner Cyrus, I would have given that same suggestion. There are some really good land use attorneys, and if you have a number of neighbors that are interested as well, pooling your resources, because it's a super fine line between advising and then advocating, and I'm interested just because I'm curious.
Sure.
But as far as the unincorporated communities that exist,
Right.
those were kind of carve outs because they're rural, but they have all these like sort of city-like components
Yeah.
to them.
Yeah.
And I agree, without having, any case law or precedent to look at, I imagine that the procedure would be similar to that of a city, but then, I don't know. I mean, as far as like self-governance and there's a whole lot.
If you look back on the 1994, they had a whole list, and there was 15 different entities in there, and you had brothers, and you have
Yeah.
places that are, was it one residence or something like that? Come on. I mean,
well-
Deschutes River Woods is much bigger than that.
And
The reason why I'm asking is what kind of legal did these guys have
Mhm.
back in 1994?
Correct.
so let's bring the meeting back to order, but yeah, I would, and I recognize, and having done this long enough, that a lot of those designations were created to figure out how to designate something that was existing when land use came about.
Right.
And there were never any provisions in how to create new ones.
Right.
And so that's why I'm suggesting that a good attorney to review the statute, and if in fact there's no language to provide for creating a new one, maybe take a look at the legislative route to see how to do it, or take a look at what your other options might be. But I would tend to agree with Peter and Will and Stephanie that it's probably not something that the county's going to want to take on unless you've got a clear legislation that we can actually address and offer an opinion on once there's a legislative basis or statutory basis.
The one thing though, when I'm saying the counties may amend designations as circumstances. So in other words, what you're saying is we don't want to change in designation.
Not, well,
I mean, that's what I'm hearing.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, if you could direct.
I'm
comment.
sorry.
Because yeah, we're kind of just in a public comment area, and we're kind of getting a little off
I got you.
track,
So,
but
I'm sorry.
I'll let Peter answer.
well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to Mr. Bryan's question, Deschutes County is not taking a position on this. I'm just acknowledging that the administrative rule that you're referencing is not as clear and objective, in my opinion, as you are communicating. I think as the chair notes, and that that you may want to think about engaging your fellow neighbors and a land use professional that could provide some independent analysis about this opportunity. But I want to be very clear that in no way am I trying to dissuade you or any other member of the Deschutes River Woods community in this case from making a respectful request to this planning commission of a work task that can be considered for the forthcoming fiscal year 25-26 work plan. I just wanted to acknowledge, again, keeping it simple, that this is a very complicated issue and one that requires a significant amount of analysis.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, unrelated, at 5:25, Miss Gould, Nunzi Gould, submitted an email to the Planning Commission email address, and I was included in that. That email has been forwarded to all of you. This is somewhat unprecedented. I don't typically, on 5 minutes before a planning commission acknowledge a correspondence sent to the planning commission, but I will in this case. Ms. Gould is concerned about activity on an exclusive farm use zone property. So you can read that email at your leisure. I'll just state that you didn't receive this response, but I've responded back to Ms. Gould separately and just said, if you believe that there's a code enforcement circumstance, please file a complaint to the Community Development Department. This planning commission is not the vehicle or the commission to receive code enforcement complaints. Again, anyone can certainly provide correspondences to the planning commission for their understanding or consideration, but respectfully, I responded and suggested that if Ms. Gould feels like the exclusive farm use zone is being violated, that she has the opportunity to file a complaint with our department, and our code enforcement specialists will respond to that as resources are available. So more than anything, just wanted to let you know that there was a communication submitted in writing, and that's been forwarded to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. With that, let's see. Back to my agenda here. Are there any public comments online? All right, we'll move on. Action items. South County Groundwater Protection Program.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I am going to be sharing my screen. Let's see if I can make that work here. Is that, let's close that for a second. Try this again. There we go. All right. Think. Okay, commissioners, both here personally and online, thank you for this opportunity to just discuss this annual groundwater protection program report. It's in your packet. The report itself is approximately, well, the report itself, if you exclude the appendices, is about 24, 25 pages. And Appendix A includes a detailed timeline that describes the commitment that has been in place for decades between Deschutes County, the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, and the U.S. Geological Survey. There's a lot to celebrate in terms of what we have accomplished to date. And as you read the memorandum and the report, and even as skimmed through the PowerPoint, which was part of your packet, you'll recognize, as staff does, that we have a lot of work still to do. And so I have a very short PowerPoint presentation. I'm totally open to any questions you may have. This is something that I want to do every year. And similar, you'll recall, we've provided a rural housing profile. This falls under that thought process. It doesn't mean that every year we'll have sweeping changes, but it does show to our community and ultimately to the Planning Commission, but as important to the Board of County Commissioners, that we understand these responsibilities. We're making them known. We have a dedicated webpage where a lot of the information that's cited in the report is available. And I don't know if you noticed this, but in the report itself, there are active links to footnotes so that we're trying to be as transparent as possible and with the requisite documentation to show what we've done over the years and why it's important to demonstrate this investment and this commitment we have for our Southern Deschutes County residents. So many of you know this, and to the extent that we have members of the public that are participating online, La Pine Subbasin serves as the primary drinking water source for thousands of residents in this region. Groundwater investigations by the U.S. Geological Survey and the Department of Environmental Quality have recognized that this sole source aquifer is vulnerable to nitrate loading from septic systems. And you've probably been reading or aware that there's nitrate challenges in the Umatilla Basin near the Port of Morro. And the input from nitrates in that location is primarily agricultural, but it still requires additional study to understand if there's other nitrate sources that are contributing to the aquifer and to groundwater wells. In this case, the studies have been done, and it is recognized that the primary source of nitrates from an anthropogenic standpoint is coming from septic systems. So again, this report is an opportunity to talk about to provide a status report, our progress that we've done, admittedly the challenges that we face going forward. The nitrates, as noted in the groundwater, as noted in the report, moves incredibly slowly in this part of the basin. There was a U.S. Geological Survey did a nitrate fade and transport model. And not only from a water quality standpoint, but as Chair Cyrus knows, in the early 2000s, they really studied how the water moves from a groundwater quantity standpoint, where the rivers are gaining and losing groundwater flows, and all of that has contributed to what arguably this is one of the most studied basins in the country. And so we're really fortunate to have that that knowledge, that science, that understanding, and yet, we have work to do to try to mitigate and minimize the amount of loading that's going into the aquifer. So as I mentioned, we'll be updating this report annually and providing, hopefully new information about some initiatives that have been undertaking. And I'll get to some of those initiatives in just a second. So quick background, and I'm already getting ahead of this just in my opening remarks, but geology, hydrology, the human development in the point of the slide, but this is an area that was similar to Deschutes River Woods, was platted with by developers to create residential lots before there was the statewide land use program. And in southern Deschutes County, there are thousands of lots that were created without a real understanding of kind of the carrying capacity of the aquifer and the vulnerability that intensity, that amount of rural residential development, what it could do from a nitrate loading standpoint to an aquifer that also provides water through domestic wells. The soils are highly porous. There's not an impervious layer that protects the aquifer from pollution sources. And noted in the report, most wells in this region are shallow, typically around 50 to 100 feet. So with septic systems being so prominent in that location, that speaks to the vulnerability. And this basin has been broadly studied, and there's a recognition that the aquifer interfaces with both the Little Deschutes and the Big Deschutes River. So we're also concerned about nitrate loading to the Deschutes River, which is a nitrogen limited stream. So over 11,000 lots of 1/2 acre to an acre in size were platted in the 60s and 70s. And as I noted, there's a reliance on on-site wastewater systems and domestic wells. USGS models demonstrate that, and this is true today, that to mitigate the impact of nitrogen loading, we need to continue to rely upon what are called these alternative treatment technologies. There are septic systems now that treat nitrates much higher than a conventional system. And as noted in the report through a USGS demonstration, or US EPA demonstration project back in the early 2000s, the result of this modeling and examination from scientists, it also got to test new nitrogen reducing septic system technology. And the result of that analysis allowed the Department of Environmental Quality to change their rules to allow these advanced systems to be placed in Oregon. And that was due to our efforts here in this basin to test those systems and show that they work. So I'll get to one of the maps at the end of this presentation, but you can see that we've been implementing those alternative treatment systems at a very large scale. So this slide here is just a list. It's not all inclusive of what we've done since the mid-90s. And Commissioner Cyrus, his father was, I think, involved in regional problem solving. We may have subjected him to those kind of collaborations when he was on the Planning Commission. But it started with a regional problem solving grant. We acquired land in the Newberry neighborhood. I mentioned the EPA National Demonstration Project. We tried innovative at the time approaches to transfer of development and pollution reduction credits. We've provided loans to La Pine Sewer District. Anyway, I won't read this verbatim. We continue to provide resources for non-conforming loans for residents that live in southern Deschutes County that can't qualify for a conventional loan. And we also provide rebates for other properties that are really interested to retrofit their septic system because maybe they're doing an addition or possibly their septic system has failed. So we still have resources, and we hope those resources will grow in the next couple of months, and I'll talk in just a second. The other thing that we tried that has been discussed, I think, before this Planning Commission is about 10 years ago, we we initiated a Goal 11 exception that would have allowed, it would have taken away the requirement to get an exception to cite a sewer system in Southern Deschutes County. We did it with the collaboration of the Department of Environmental Quality and the Department of Land Conservation and Development. They helped write the findings. And we were hopeful that this kind of blanket Goal 11 exception would have then provided neighborhoods, residents to explore establishing a sewer district and sewer systems if they felt that these innovative nitrogen-reducing septic systems weren't the best option. Unfortunately, that decision that was approved by the board, an adopted ordinance, it was appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals by Central Oregon Land Watch, and it was remanded based on very particular factors, and those are noted in the report. So to sewer Southern Deschutes County, similar to the conversation we had earlier today, it's complicated. Let me just move this.
Real quickly, what's the
Please.
status of that?
The status of the Goal 11 exception? It was remanded, but the decisions by the Land Use Board of Appeals make it very difficult to reinitiate it or to do another one, in my opinion, because you have to demonstrate there's an imminent public health hazard. And then you have to specifically identify areas where a sewer is going to be sited, or which lots in particular will benefit from a sewer. And all of a sudden you're going from kind of this blanket wide assessment to a much more granular assessment. And then you're really, identifying particular properties that could be beholden to such a sewer system. So it's been put on the back burner because of the rigors of the statewide land use program. Now, that's not to say that the Board of County Commissioners, residents couldn't engage LCDC or engage the legislature to change these rules, but it hasn't happened to date. And I know for the Board of County Commissioners, for some of the commissioners, they wish there was more flexibility to cite sewers and sewer systems in this region, and it would start with, removing the Goal 11 exception or the Goal 11 exception requirement. So I'm sure it will be revisited over time because it's so captivating to many residents. It's also important to acknowledge that Terrebonne right now has created a sewer district, and they're trying to fund the sewer what would be a sewer collection system to convey sewer from Terrebonne and direct it to Redmond's new sewer wastewater treatment plant. They're looking for millions of dollars of funding. And Tumalo, as you know, created I want to say a sewer district or a sanitary authority. But it's not, I think it was a sewer district, but they're not a taxing district. And so they have the ability now to look for funding. But I just use those two examples as an indicator of how difficult it is to create and fund and operate and maintain a sewer system. And Deschutes County isn't in the sewer business, so to speak. So we don't have the capacity to, it's not like we're not like a municipality that has excess capacity at a wastewater treatment plant. So it's complicated. A lot of residents and even county commissioners believe it's an important option that should be considered. And that may be true. I'm just again acknowledging that it's complicated. Okay. I only have one or two more slides. So I just need to move these. There we go. So this is just an inventory. There are over 10,000 lots in the region. 6,900 are developed. 3,400 are vacant. And of the 6,900 developed lots, this is really why I called it out in red, just under 5,700 are continuing to rely on conventional on-site systems. We, as my next slide will show, we've approved over 1,200 alternative treatment systems. These are those advanced systems that apply to on-site wastewater treatment systems. But we have a lot of work to do. It's important to acknowledge that advanced treatment systems still produce some nitrates into the ground. But nonetheless, I believe we need to continue to focus on this program and do everything we can to invest in this type of technology and make it available to residents in rural Deschutes County. And so this map here is showing you where those 1,200 advanced systems are located.
Oh, Peter,
Yeah,
real
please.
quick, Commissioner Williams has her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see that.
Oh,
Yes,
I didn't either.
please. Yes, Commissioner.
So has it ever been considered, and we upgraded to an ATT in 2018. It did cost us $20,000. We were appreciative of the county grant funding. Has it ever been considered, instead of trying to sewer the South County, providing water to the South County?
It's a great question, and one that on the next slide I begin discussing. And so maybe I'll just, if I can, I'll select this slide. But one of the things that's happening right now. So let me slow walk this. My response to your excellent question. Right now, there are two quadrants in La Pine in what's called the Newberry neighborhood. And if you read the report, the sale of that land funds what's called a groundwater partnership fund that the Community Development Department manages. And the sale of those two quadrants, when they sell, and it's not a matter of if they sell, but when they sell, there will be, upwards to $2 million that will be available to distribute in a strategic way for Southern Deschutes County residents. And we still have over 300 acres that will be available for sale over the course of the next 10, 20, 30 years. What I have articulated to the board is when one or both of those quadrants sell, we need to convene a financial advisory committee. So now, Commissioner Williams, I'm looking at you. And one of the topics that I think needs to come up is it's not only about how do we minimize or mitigate the nitrate loading, but how can we also ensure access to safe drinking water. And so I am anticipating that there will be conversations about providing, this is just my opinion, I'm not being the oracle here, but I wouldn't be surprised that there's conversations about how we can help people deepen their wells, or how, and if we can do that, how we can maybe help people share a well, so that you can amortize that cost with a shared well agreement. I think that does happen in places. So that's a long-winded answer, Commissioner Williams, to yes, I think access to safe drinking water will be a prominent topic in addition to efforts to address the nitrate loading that's occurring. So I appreciate you raising that question. I didn't know if there's a follow-up with your, yeah.
And there is, regardless of safe water in the South County, in my neighborhood specifically, 20% of our wells dried up in the last 4 years. And I know of 2 specific properties that had to dig deeper twice. So that's kind of another avenue. I mean, about water, instead of trying to sewer, why don't we try to community water some of these areas so that we dig way down deep, like Sun River, Caldera Springs, those neighborhoods, and separate the well and the septic in a more entirety.
Yeah, and another excellent comment, and what you're talking about is creating essentially a water district. How do you If there's interest in that, how do you, you prepare a feasibility study that lays out those details just as you described? And, are there pilot projects? Are there, areas where residents are excited about this exploration? So, along this topic, that first bullet point, which talks about grant opportunities, I don't remember the bill off the top of my head. And I can share it with the planning commission. I could send you an email. But there is a bill that the board supported and testified that would provide millions of dollars to Oregonians through, as I recall, Oregon State University, that would provide assistance for not only helping people with their on-site septic systems, but also for situations involving domestic wells. So I'm recognizing that we need to be well, I'm not speaking personally, but we need to make the board aware, and they themselves need to champion the types of legislation that can make those investments that we've just talked about in places like Southern Deschutes County for resiliency. So more to come on that bill, and I'll keep you informed and the Planning Commission informed as that bill moves through the legislature. Thank you. I just have a few more.
Oh, yeah, keep going.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say keep.
Oh, okay. Well, that turns out to be the end of my presentation, Commissioner Williams. It's almost as if, and this didn't happen, but it's almost as if we worked behind the scenes to choreograph that. But the point, the questions that you just raised were really what I wanted to draw out under these emerging opportunities. And like I said, I believe that if once one or both of those quadrants sell, they're listed for sale as we speak, that the Community Development Department, in partnership with a financial advisory committee consisting of South County residents, and I would presume the board would appoint that committee, that will allow us to begin really engaging on where those strategic resources should be deployed. The reason why it's not happening now is because we don't have a lot of resources, and I think the report notes what we have in our in these dedicated funds. So we still have tens of thousands of dollars, but my thought is once those funds get replenished, then we're going to get real interest from a financial advisory committee, because we have funds to spend, and it will show real synergy with the Newberry neighborhood, that its market value is only increasing and can be further leveraged over the course of the next 10, 20, 30 years. So I probably took too long for this agenda item, but I think it's incredibly important that we have this conversation. If nothing else, the Planning Commission is aware of it, but it's a commitment from Deschutes County and the Community Development Department to, again, share what we've done. It's not perfect, but I think the report speaks for itself. We have invested millions of dollars already into Southern Deschutes County. I will freely admit it's not enough, as we show that there's still almost 5,700 lots out there that are relying on conventional systems. We know that there are challenges for domestic wells, as Commissioner Williams noted, but we are committed to partner with other agencies and our communities down there to make that area as resilient as possible and as prosperous as possible. So I really appreciate, Mr. Chairman, just the opportunity to share this report, and I'll do it again next year. And hopefully we have some exciting news to share with the Planning Commission about, what we've done over the course of 12 months. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Yeah, I would have one quick question. Does it make any sense for Deschutes County to approach through the legislative process to amendments for Goal 11 in order to allow something like this? It seems to me that the ultimate solution is to stop the nitrates going into the ground rather than try to continue the ground pollution at the same time, try to create a alternative water supply. That the ultimate solution is stopping the contamination via either individuals, the high-tech septics or the sewer, but I just wonder if the county is considered using its legislative route.
It's a good question and one that is, that the board could choose to utilize, if they so chose. As a department head, we're not in a position to advocate, but, I know that it's been a prominent topic and there's been conversations with individual commissioners with the Department of Land Conservation and Development. But as of right now, there's been no movement. So it's an excellent question and it's almost a rhetorical question in some respects to the extent that the board could do that. It's just a matter of whether or not they believe that they'll get a receptive audience, and that's really I don't know the answer to that just given the legislative makeup, but certainly there continues to be interest about sewering areas in southern Deschutes County, and Goal 11 is seen as a obstacle because, you can't even begin talking about areas where you might want to sewer or how to mobilize your community because you've got this Goal 11 exception hanging over your head. So it's an excellent question, and I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, yeah, I guess I mean just real quick, it seemed to me that I know the purpose of the goal 11 is to prevent sewer and urban expansion into rural areas, but there's some instances where especially cluster subdivisions and such development in rural areas that it might make more sense to put in a mini sewer or some of the newer technologies with a cost-effective sewer system. I mean, just the logic of it seems to make sense just from a pollution and a waste management standpoint.
Yeah, it's a great point, and there are these cluster systems that you can do that can be shared, as you duly noted. The problem one of the problems right now is the way the rule is written is you have to declare an eminent public health hazard. And don't want to get ahead of Commissioner Stockamp, who's
So anyhow, yeah, Commissioner Stockamp.
Yeah, I just had a question for Peter. Is there a consensus from DEQ or USGS or whatever agency would be, like what the most effective method is for improving groundwater protection in South Deschutes County? Because it seemed like a couple of the main solutions, it's upgrading to the ATT systems or deepening the wells.
Yeah, great question,
And
Commissioner.
Paul reading in the report. Yeah.
The U.S. Geological Survey back in the early 2000s did do modeling. They did a nitrate fate and transport modeling, and they also did an optimization model, and it showed at that time that nitrogen reducing systems could reduce the loading and protect the aquifer, which is, as you noted in the report, the results of that analysis after a multi-year effort of engaging the public in southern Deschutes County led to the adoption of a local rule. And that local rule, which was very controversial, subsequently overturned through referendum. But what that rule would have done is right now, all new development in southern Deschutes County, new residences have to have an alternative treatment system. What the local rule would have done is it would have required it was like, I want to say 16 years, 15 or 16 years, it would have required all residences with an existing system to retrofit by, I want to say it was like 2025. It was literally this year. And so that mandate, amongst other challenges that the residents felt were unreasonable, led to a referendum. So these alternative treatment systems have been demonstrated to effectively reduce nitrogen loading, but to Commissioner, to your point, sewers do so as well. It's just that we don't have the ability to examine a sewering option, and we didn't at that time. And so USGS didn't model what would it mean if you sewered, 10,000 lots with a sewer system. You will note in the report that there was an opportunity to do the Sun River. We did a Sun River sewer feasibility study, and ultimately, due to, I think, the Goal 11 exception being remanded, that opportunity came and went. And there's some cost estimates of what it would have cost to extend a collection system into portions of southern Deschutes County. So there's been a lot of investigation and evaluations, but at this point, we continue to rely on ATTs because of their effectiveness.
Great. Thank you. That answer your questions?
Yep.
All right. Oh, Commissioner Altman.
So I have a question about the properties that are for sale and that would be for sale in the future. How do I ask this question? Are you sort of allowing the problem to continue by selling properties that would eventually be developed, and then you would need more money to help people pay for systems? Or is it assumed that when the properties sell and are developed, they will be using a different kind of system so that it would be mitigated to a certain extent?
Yeah, good question. So to clarify, in the Newberry neighborhood of La Pine, that's all on sewer. And so the whole premise of that, of us acquiring the property, which we got through special legislation through Congress, was to use the goal was, the thought was at the time, is we can channel some of the development pressures that South County is experiencing to this master planned area in La Pine that has centralized water and centralized sewer. So the proceeds of the sale of those two quadrants, as I mentioned, go into a dedicated fund, and then they're redistributed out into specifically to rural southern Deschutes County. So it wouldn't, we're not kind of, paying Peter, what's this term? Paying Peter to stealing from Peter to pay Paul, pay Peter. Anyway, I can't think of it off the top of my head. But anyway, we're not just moving, the chips around. There is significant funding that's available from the Newberry neighborhood over time, and the estimated value is over $35 million. Now, that amount, imagine if we could sell it today, that's still not enough to retrofit potentially 5,700 lots, not to mention dealing with domestic wells. But it's funding that can be leveraged, and it still demonstrates, in my opinion, this commitment at the local level to do everything we can to invest in southern Deschutes County, which is it should not be dismissed, especially when you look at other regions of the state that are dealing with nitrogen loading and don't have this kind of synergy, this investment, this commitment, and this standing that we have. So I'm promoting the good work that we've done, but at the same time, I'm readily acknowledging that there's so much more that needs to take place.
Thank you. Anybody
Robbing
else?
Peter.
Oh, Commissioner Williams.
So this will be really quick, and just real quick on the first part, bringing maybe community water to South County kind of skirts that goal 11. So that's all I'm going to leave at that. And then I remember maybe a year or two ago, we were discussing like the ATT systems that the state of Oregon has. We only have so many that are approved, and they are not the most efficient. I believe the state of Maine has approved ATT systems that are, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but they're like 95 more percent effective at filtering the effluent than what the state of Oregon has approved, which is like 75 more effective than like a standard concrete tank. So I would again reiterate, at a county level, maybe we can ask the state to broaden the approval of different ATT systems that are more efficient than what the state currently allows.
And Commissioner Williams, excellent point. Another organic play from the script that never happened, but it's an excellent point. My understanding is that rules are in place to allow those systems that, just as you noted, treat nitrates at 70, 80, 90% more effective than a conventional system. What's happening now is I've heard that there may be call it a supplier that's in Redmond that may have be able to produce such a system, but right now it's still in its infancy. So I don't think that there's any changes for the rules at this point. I think the rules allow it. I think that there may need to be some testing to make sure that they function here in this region. And then the third point, as I just mentioned, I believe that there's synergy in place for a provider to or call it a provider of this type of technology. They may be emerging in our region, but it's a topic that our county commission highlights all the time, and we really are hopeful that we can get those advanced technologies in place, produced at a significant scale, and that they can be deployed. Yeah, thank you so much.
Anybody else?
Chairman.
All right, thank you. So next on the agenda is refining future panel discussions. Mr. Groves.
Again, Will Groves, your planning manager. This is an item brought to you by request from the Planning Commission. There had been some interest in the possibility of a return to and continued use of panel discussions for a variety of purposes. I put together a quick memo, was in the packet tonight, describing kind of how we've used these in the past and recent discussions associated with them. Of course, the purposes of the agenda item is to allow y'all to talk to each other about what's important to you in panel discussions. We've historically used them to inform decision-making on complex land use issues, and brought in technical experts for that. And as part of the discussion tonight, it seems likely you'll talk about, what panels are a priority for you, what would be the goals of those discussions, who should be invited to participate, and what organizational or reporting resources are required from staff. And in your most recent discussions, some of the big topics have been how to balance public participation and focused discussion. Panels have frequently not been in a question and answer format or kind of a town hall format, but rather experts presenting to you where you ask them questions, and you had kind of discussions about how to improve community engagement from these. Should people be able to ask questions in advance that you'd be able to bring to them? Also sort of enhancing accessibility and reporting. What sort of documentation is produced after these panels to document the discussions that were happening? And thinking about scheduling and integration. Certainly the Planning Commission, hasn't uniformly had a full schedule in kind of recent meeting history. We certainly went through, especially with the comprehensive plan, some long nights, and it's been a little bit easier here for the time being. And I just wanted to acknowledge too, one of the things we're dealing with in the planning division, I think I've spoken this to before, is that kind of a shifting in tides of, as we come into spring, we start to feel fuller, and in terms of applications, and we see that in a variety of ways. We see that through current planning applications, applicant initiated text amendments. So things that, changes to code or comprehensive plan that come in through applicants. Sometimes those are rezones. Sometimes those are text changes that are proposed. And the cumulative demands of those we're back in the place where they're starting to stack up a little bit. I don't think we have enough at this point for there to be a hiring signal to say, oh, we have enough work that we should really be trying to look to see if we need to get another person. But it is starting to fill up, and we've had a number of discussions around the office, which is, when we say yes to something, we need to say no to something else, or at least later to it. So as you go through these discussions, it'll be important to think about with these panel discussions, where do they sit in your priority? Is this something that, is this something that's a very high priority and might sneak ahead of something that is optional but you've identified as important, like dark skies? Or is that, does it sit at a lower priority of that? How do you see this in the mix of things? And ultimately, I think the result of this, to the extent that you would like to, is that you would bring this kind of the results of the discussion into our work plan as we do those hearings and advocate to the board, say, dear board, we know we have semi-limited staff resources that can be allocated to the Planning Commission. We'd like to see some panel discussions, and we believe it's worth, using those limited resources to advance those panel discussions, in some configuration at the expense potentially of the speed by which some of these other items might be brought before you. This is all just by way of teeing this up, and again, is intended not to direct how you approach this or your discussions tonight, but just let you know where you've been in the past. And I'm here to support the discussion that you have. There's no motion that comes out of this. This is really, I think, a free form discussion at the discretion of the chair to talk about what your hopes and dreams for panels are and what might come of that. And I'll be ready to support you as you have questions.
Any comments from commissioners?
I have a comment.
Good.
So I've been here for a number of panel discussions and I've just found them very interesting and educational. But it sometimes it feels like we're learning a lot that then helps us process public testimony later and ultimately influences how we make our recommendations to the board. So I think that's useful for the planning commission to continue to be educated and brought up to speed on these different really important community topics. But I also, if we are going to prioritize them, which I think is worthy of a discussion, since they're dark skies, dark skies, there are certain things that that are at the top of my, I'm not going to get ahead of the deliberation on the work plan, but if we are going to prioritize them, I would like to see how we can also use that opportunity and the people's time who are coming to educate us. If we can use that to educate our community members, especially community leaders, people that frequently come to give public testimony. I don't know how we can interest those folks in participating more, but I'd love to see something that was a little bit more like the comprehensive plan update community engagements where it's very interactive, and very let's bring more people into this, not just get ourselves educated.
Commissioner Hallman?
I have a question for Will, specifically speaking about staff time, and I know it would be hard to answer this with a blanket answer, but considering that these take more than 0% of your time, let's say we wanted to do something for dark skies. How much time does it take you to prepare for something like that? Is it like 10 hours of your work time? And I mean, I know you're not going to sit down and do it all at once, but certainly probably more than 1 hour, less than 40. I don't know. I'm just wondering how much time you'd devote to something like that.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Depends a little bit what's being asked, you know, to the extent that the planning commission identifies some experts who, you know, that they've previously spoken to and said they'd love to come, and we're just trying to get people to be at a place at a time, you know, that's something that's, you know, in probably the 2 to 5 hour range. You know, writing an agenda item, getting people to just agree to show up and accept a calendar invite can be pretty simple. To the extent that we're trying to identify a panel, and especially to the extent that we're trying to make sure that that panel feels balanced, to the extent that it might be on a topic that the community has a diversity of viewpoints, it may be tricky to get all the right people in the room at the same time. So that would add some time as we, you know, had to reach out to people who would, you know, effectively these panel members who might be volunteering their time from other, you know, their day jobs. I think in the long end, in terms of engagement, is if staff's asked to produce either preparatory materials or summary materials, those can take a longer time. So some of our, you know, our water panels that we produce can have longer documents in association with those. You know, that's something that, you know, you have a panel up here, staff attempts to summarize it. The PC engages with this to just, you know, decide, is that a good summary? Does it cover the topics that we, you know, that we heard, and catches, you know, what was important to us in there? And so that could be, you know, that sits, you know, that's certainly starting to sit up in the sort of the same range as some of our smaller projects. And I think of a smaller project, there's a, you know, Nicole's going to talk to you about a update to our medical hardship dwelling, which is, you know, something that has relatively limited engagement, relatively clear path forward, but, you know, would take, you know, a panel discussion would probably take a similar amount of effort and coordination in terms of the scheduling and especially documentation afterwards. So it depends a little bit what you're asking for and how hard it is to wrangle people, frankly.
Yeah, Commissioner Williams?
Yes, so I'm kind of looking at my screen, not our screen. I definitely know water. We've been talking about it. Wildlife conservation, dark skies. Those three, for me personally, I feel are strong contenders. Destination resorts, I just don't see a ton new coming in. But, and I'm going to reiterate again because, I'm on the Nextdoor app, and a way to engage our community prior to meetings is the posting of these panels, the posting of our planning commission meetings. I see quite regularly multiple other Deschutes County agencies post on Nextdoor, and you get a flood of feedback on all sides of what people are thinking. And I really think that we need to utilize Nextdoor as a free board. What I would like to see is the planning commission sometimes makes recommendations, and sometimes they're taken up by the county commissioners, sometimes they're not. So what I'd like to see is can we pull out validating information in our panel meetings, things like that. But I'm definitely dark skies, and obviously I'm definitely for some water panels. And in that respect, in addition to maybe South County Water, Commissioner Cyrus has a lot of experience with the irrigation districts. I'm really interested in the capping of canals versus not capping of canals, and then maybe just capping the top, because we have discussions about if we completely concrete the canals, we don't have any groundwater going back in, but maybe we can just stop some absorption into the sky. So just things like that, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, thank you. And I've kind of brought up the topic of panels at the last meeting, and so maybe started the process. But, for me, listening to at the public hearings and the discussions and everything that's ongoing, and a number of years ago, I actually participated in a water panel. And then we've had a lot of turnover within the Planning Commission. And I just thought it made sense to maybe circle back and kind of re-educate and bring the newer commissioners up to speed on kind of what's going on. And also a lot of new information's come out. There's a lot of new data. For example, now they're telling us that we've got the largest groundwater aquifer potentially in the world sitting underneath us. And, do we really have a drought problem or a critical water area, or have we just not tapped it? There's a lot of new studies and information about, junipers affecting the aquifers, what's happening with the current conservation measures. I'd like to personally see a panel discussion with some folks that have expertise in all of those areas that could come talk to us. And I guess with regard to the public, I'm trying to kick around the ideas of how that might incorporate public participation. I don't want to open it up to the circus of a hearing, but maybe the public that's here could submit some written questions that we could kind of sort through and address within the panel. Because I think in order to keep a control on the situation and get the most out of it we can, I think the panel discussion needs to be, even maybe a roundtable discussion between the panel and the Planning Commission, so we can get as much as we possibly can for the time that those people are willing to volunteer to come talk to us. But, personally for me, I'd love to see something on water. And then, when we got done with the whole mule deer, we spent a long time talking about mule deer. And the discussion that we had as a planning commission when we got done is that we'd really like to continue the discussion a little bit. And I think there's a lot of stuff that I would have liked to have seen come out that didn't and wasn't made public. And, I'd certainly like to, quite frankly, ask some more questions of the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, a little more clarification on some of the management areas. I know mule deer are still a problem, and populations, I'm guessing, are probably still going down, but there were a lot of areas that didn't come up in public comments that I think there's probably some experts that could probably weigh in and we could have a good roundtable discussion on that. And the reason I mentioned destination resorts last time is because it seems to be one of the hot button issues that keeps coming up over and over and over. And I know from my personal experience, having been on the legislative work group that helped draft the original destination resort language for the state, I know there's a huge amount of misinformation that's going around. And I don't think the county itself has actually addressed or dug into any of that for nearly 30 years. And so I thought maybe it's time to revisit some of the reasons why we have resorts in Deschutes County and what are the positives and negatives from a realistic neutral standpoint, as opposed to the hype that goes out. So those are, that was kind of my thoughts within that. And, I would certainly have, I've a list of names that I'm aware of and some of the experts in each of those different areas. And I'm sure some of the other planning commission members do too. But Commissioner Stopkamp.
Yeah, I just wanted to share a couple of the topics that really intrigued me. Water is one of the higher priorities for me, and Deschutes River Conservancy hosted some really good, I think it was back in 2023, they hosted some good roundtable stuff. I think they had about 3 or 4 experts, and then they had a mediator. And I believe the way questions were submitted were people in the audience like texted in, and then the mediator picked questions. And those were just really good panels that were done by them. And I feel like even coordinating with the Deschutes River Conservancy, if they're able to, we would very likely, I would assume, invite them potentially for this, but if they could help with what they've found to be effective for coordinating, just so the whole workload doesn't fall on the county and on the planning staff. And another one that Commissioner Cyrus was just discussing was the Goal 5 wildlife resources. I feel like when we really went into the discussing mule deer, but also on the ODFW radar was elk and raptors. So I'd love it if we could discuss a little further, adding in elk, raptors, just some of the other stuff, so we can start diving into that conversation too, because there's a lot of stuff that they affect each other between those wildlife resources. So I'd love it to be an even more comprehensive discussion if we do a Goal 5 one. So those are some of my top priorities.
And I would like to clarify that I wasn't discounting certainly the night sky, and I'd certainly like to see it as a priority, but not for a panel. I'd prefer to see it as an actual work plan to finally, have a hearing and discuss and take a look at the actual ordinances themselves.
And just by way of note, this has been greenlit by the board, and it's I think I described it, it's like not on the back burner, it's on that weird middle burner that you have on your stove that never quite comes to a boil. But it's we're always one project away from bringing it into action, and then things like RVs come up and things like that. So definitely something we're interested in seeing as well. And the board has officially, asked us to proceed with it. So just trying to get it to come up in order rather than some of these other things that are we've talked about doing, but have never been officially, put on the go list.
So what is it you're looking for from us?
Well, this has been a great discussion. So I think I know Commissioner Kiris has her hand up. Maybe
Oh, sorry.
let that part of the discussion, and we'll jump to
Maybe just like a quick comment, relative to what you said, Chair, about the, destination resorts, mule deer, water are more contentious issues. I really would enjoy having a panel discussion. I think it takes us, we might have an opportunity here to have a conversation with people where we're not deciding something. So normally we're having these hearings and people are really adamantly presenting strong viewpoints, but I don't know if there's a way to set this up to where we try to have kind of an open mind and learn things rather than trying to impart our views on other people. And so, just the chair's point that, I would love to learn more about the history of destination resorts and the pros and cons, but I'd like to have a conversation that's sort of like, what are the pros and cons? Not this person thinks it's all pros and this person thinks it's all cons. Cause I think we've, we've sort of exhausted that style of conversation in the efforts to get people's opinions out there. So I'm suppose it's all in the framing of the conversation, but that's what I'd hope for.
And I would agree. I mean, my thought was, folks, for example, like from EDCO or the county assessor, or people that can talk about, somebody from, where it's the sheriff's office or somebody that can just educate as far as what are the facts? I mean, what are the impacts? I mean, granted, groundwater, I mean, water resources department, I mean, economic impacts, some of the different things where people could just lay out facts as opposed to a combative situation with, he's bad or she's bad, or, and rather than being confrontational, it's, here's what the information is.
Perfect. Yeah.
Anybody else? So,
It looks like
Oh,
Kelsey. maybe.
okay. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, team.
Commissioner?
Hi, I was wondering if there was an opportunity for some kind of panel on housing or affordable housing. I know that comes up a fair amount. And so just didn't know if that is, I haven't got to sit through a panel discussion yet. So, I'm here to kind of learn and observe. But that is just something that's sometimes on my mind, is just, kind of our affordable housing issue that's always brought up.
I mean, I think it's kind of whatever it is we're looking for, and is what the direction. And I guess with that, I would ask Will, kind of are you looking for a motion, or are you just looking for feedback from us on kind of what our thoughts are?
I think this was and open to your interpretation and suggestions. I think this was a panel discussion on panel discussions. And this was to prepare you for the March work sessions and hearings on the annual work plan. And I think based on what I've heard from you, I think as part of that, I can imagine the Planning Commission advocating and saying, hey, board, in addition to these other things that are identified, on the work plan, panels are important to us. We'd really like to talk about A, B, and C, maybe in this order, in terms of importance. And we'd like you to, direct staff to approach, to help these things happen in a way, so either simple discussions, the idea of people texting in, that's we can handle that kind of thing very easily. Think a little bit about what kind of documentation you want after. If we have a panel discussion and it's available, we put it up on a web page and say, please see our video. That's pretty easy. If there's, a fact sheet or a summary of the discussions that come out, that's more staff engagement. And then you'd say kind of the relative priority of that, like, hey, this is a high priority for us, or we'd sure love to get to one of these in the next year. And then we would carry that forward to the board as part of our annual work plan discussions and say the Plan Commission recommended this. And, I think particularly for water, which comes up a lot, but all of these issues, we'd be encouraging the board to say, that the Planning Commission regularly has to make decisions where these topics get discussed in part. And sometimes, and we've seen the value in the past of doing sort of just standalone understanding of water issues. Not advocating for this one particularly, but the panel on housing and affordable housing, I think that it took me years at this job to begin to understand how the Oregon State land use system tries to, create, opportunities in cities, but also not, these urban unincorporated communities that are allowed to develop historic ways, how much goes out in the rural area, how much land changes from farm zone land to other lands over time, and what that does to affect housing and the relative magnitude of that. Again, not advocating for that one, but that's one that it's hard to put your head around all at once about how all this, how do people in the end up in a house somewhere in Oregon and why did they end up here and not there are interesting topics. So definitely something you could advocate for. And I think it sounds like you're well prepared to have that discussion when we come into that, when we come into the work plan. I don't know if there's anything else you need to do this evening. If you did want to have a little bit of discussion about, at the outset, it seems like A, B, and C are a priority. And, we definitely want to get to one or two of these in a year. You could continue that discussion tonight, or we could do that as part of the work plan. It's still, relatively early, and I don't think Nicole's item is too long, but it may make sense once you see kind of the breadth of things that come in the work plan. It'll help you figure out where this, sits in that spectrum.
Yeah, great. I guess my thought personally is that, we've skipped a number of meetings over the last 6 months
Mhm.
because other issues haven't been ready to be brought before us. And my thought was maybe if we've got some things like a panel discussion that takes minimal staff time, that, mostly from an educational standpoint for us, and utilize our time to, go ahead and do some of those as fill-ins.
Yeah, for sure. And definitely to the comment that we received from Commissioner Williams, Nextdoor, we use Nextdoor to advertise hearings, but certainly panels would be at, anytime that we're looking to up community engagement, that's a good opportunity. And, we could also talk about, I don't think at this point we're advertising. I don't think there was, for example, anything from this meeting that was specifically advertised to the public. It can be frustrating for people when, it's not the hearing night. And so they show up at the work session and they find out that it's like, well, you need to come back next week to talk about it. But at the same time, more engagement's better. So we could continue to look at the tools that we have. Certainly as we've discussed, the legal section of the bulletin is not the primary way that people get their information anymore.
So great. Commissioner Williams.
So with respect, Will, to the announcing on Nextdoor, public hearings are announced. I know in general, a lot of people aren't paying attention to just our regular planning commissions on the second and fourth Thursday. But if we were to put it on Nextdoor or the Source Weekly is hugely read and it's free. Ben Bulletin is not free, so folks don't get it. So just letting folks know and say this is a work session meeting, but if you're interested in the topics that the Planning Commission is reviewing, it might pique the curiosity later down the road to get more public engagement.
Yeah, that sounds very reasonable. Tanya Salzman, of course, puts together the packet for you and distributes that information. So I'll take a task for myself here of following up with her and our county information officers about what it might look like to maybe just advertise every one of these meetings, in these types of resources. And I definitely caught the Source in Nextdoor, and I know that there's, certainly Facebook, us elder millennials and Gen Z and older that still occasionally go on that platform.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm just teasing you. So are there any ethical or legal issues with, I mean, I wouldn't think there would be, but I'm just asking in case, with us commissioners posting on Facebook groups like Central Oregon Rants and Raves. Commissioner Cyrus is popular on that group. People like his comments a lot. But like if we post that on there and just say, hey, you guys are concerned about county issues and have a lot of thoughts on these, is it okay for us to invite people via that? Or do you guys feel like that's like crossing a line into us playing, social media marketing for the county? Like, is there a line there? Am I imagining that?
We have a senior assistant legal counsel, Stephanie, here with us. I think we had talked about this previously, and correct me if I'm wrong here. I think I've got this, is that there's definitely the safe harbor is always for you to say, hey, we're going to be talking on this on Thursday. Please feel free to come. The place where it gets a little bit dicey is we're talking about this on Thursday. I think you should testify and say X is where it gets, from making people aware of something to advocacy on a position.
And I think I've had extensive discussions about some of that, but it's my understanding is if it's an issue that we are actually going to be making a decision on, then we have to be very cautious about any kind of an advocacy or position because we are the deciding body. But if it's not a topic that's in front of us, it's a free for all.
Right. Yes. Again, Stephanie Marshall, Senior Assistant Legal Counsel. I think all of you were on the commission last year, or maybe it was the year before when I did that memo. Yes. So, my general advice is to err on the side of being cautious and not engaging in a manner that might appear to be advocacy, even if it's very, very, innocent in your mind. you just never know how other people are going to look at it. So, just the facts, ma'am, just, here's when we're meeting, we encourage people that are interested in this topic to come and testify. That's pretty cut and dried. But, as always, if there's something that comes up or a situation that has you concerned, you can reach out to any of us and we will provide some advice, direction, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, I mean, for example, thank you, with the mule deer issue.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, I went on to a number of social media sites and advertised the fact that we were having public hearings and encouraged the public to show up and participate. I was very careful not to advocate any position whatsoever, but just encourage the public to be aware there are meetings. We want to hear from you. So, and I looked at that, especially as a commissioner representing the sisters community, that I was encouraging the sisters community to come and participate and educate them the fact that we were discussing topics of interest.
Right. And that's appropriate. The other side of that I was going to mention is none of you can control how other people view a statement that you make. But again, if I was to read it on a piece of paper, Commissioner Cyrus posted this, we're having a meeting, everyone that's interested is encouraged to come, again, it would be difficult to prove that was a violation or, that you stepped over the line. But again, knowing that you can't control what other people perceive, it's also good to kind of have that in the back of your mind. Again, not saying anybody did anything wrong, but, that's the part that, that we have no control over.
Yes.
Just wanted to clarify the intention of my question was not to make you seem like you did something. I know you do, but for anyone who might be listening, that was not my intention. It was more like in the past, personally, I've hesitated to comment on these discussions and say, hey guys, we're having a meeting, like come out and say whatever you want to say, because I've just been maybe overly cautious. And I actually admire people who are more willing to like be outgoing about and engaging the public and saying, hey, like we are having this thing, like please do come out. We want to hear what you have to say. So it really helps to hear what you just said, because it feels like it gives me permission to invite people more and without engaging them in like an opinion or whatever. So like, sorry if that
Yeah,
sounded
no.
weird, but yeah,
No offense taken.
you do have a thick skin, but still.
And along those lines, I like to keep in mind that, the first statewide planning goal is one, community engagement. So, I tip my hat in that favor. And I think that, in some ways, it's just like we were talking about as far as noticing, you can notice directly. We can also talk about how the notice is published and who is reached by that notice. I can't think there's not a situation in which too much community engagement can be had.
And I would, correct me if I'm wrong, but we wear two hats. We are members of the community and we are citizens. As long as we are not representing ourselves as Planning Commission, then we're free to participate in any discussion we want, as long as it's not a topic that's in front of us.
Right.
So, anything else? So, Commissioner Altman.
Williams, but
Commissioner Williams, go ahead.
So I don't do a lot of social media stuff. But I know like you can I don't know, copy or hashtag or at like the ... If we were to at or hashtag Deschutes County Planning Commission or County Development Department or whatever, like they would maybe get CC'd in on it, and then maybe that would kind of like they could not police us, but if we wanted to make sure that we were posting appropriately and not discriminatorily, do something like that. And like, I don't have Facebook. I barely have an IG. So, and I don't tweet. and I don't blue sky and I don't do any of that stuff. So I don't know all the proper terminology, but like for those who do, like if you want to make sure that someone captures that you've like mentioned them, that could be done.
Right. Yes. You know, and I have to do a very quick, detour to come back around to this point. So I've been coaching the Bend High kids. I'm one of the 3 coaches for mock trial, and they have their big competition on Saturday. And the case that they were assigned this year has to do with the defamation. It's a defamation case where the owner of a carnival, this guy approached him and said, "Hey, I'm going to be like your social media guru." And the owner was like, no. Then there was an accident in the carnival. Nobody died. But then this guy starts posting this stuff, and then a real big influencer reposted it. So one of the legal questions is, well, he didn't originally post that. He just like retweeted, reposted, and so like who's responsible for what was said? I mean, and then there's AI issues and all sorts of stuff.
Wow.
But kind of interesting. So that brings me around to what we were just talking about, reposting, retweeting. I would say again, if somebody says something that, might indicate some sort of bias, and then you are retweeting it or reposting it, again, it's just that appearance of fairness thing to keep in mind. And boy, the more I talk, the more I sound like, we're not a police state. We do trust you all to be mindful of the decisions you make, but just realize, that there's a lot of ways that messages can get out, and sometimes messages can be misread. So just be careful.
Well, like you say, you have a freedom of speech, but sometimes
Yes.
there are consequences.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, the retweet's really interesting. You can imagine someone, like you let's say that you didn't like groundwater. I'm gonna pick something
Yeah.
silly. A real hater of groundwater. And someone had posted, "You know what? I hate groundwater." And if you then retweeted that and said, "You know what? This guy's got a great perspective. You all should come to our meeting on Thursday to talk about that." That's starting to drift a little bit
Yeah.
there. If you can just be like, "Hey, interesting perspective," or just, "We're talking about this at our meeting. Please feel free to come." That those, amplifying those voices versus just acknowledging that there's a opportunity to engage on that. You can see how it drifts a little bit pretty easily.
Commissioner Allman?
Yeah, mine was just a question about if I'm sorry, I'm losing my words. If you could have one of these meetings, like a focus group meeting, outside of here, and I say that specifically thinking about dark skies, I think everybody would say, well, I don't see why there would be controversy. Sure, it sounds good. But then if you could get out of here and go to an observatory and be like, look how great the dark skies are. And you have a presenter who, it wouldn't really be staff's job to present. It's the professional who knows all about dark skies to present. To me, that sounds like fun, but
So a field
just
trip.
a field trip, thinking outside of the box to talk about, an issue like,
For a retreat.
I just
Yeah.
imagine putting you all on a bus and taking you over to Salem.
let's go. I just think that would be fun.
Yeah, no. So, of course there's some advantages to having meetings here. The ability to have them be hybrid, which is a requirement. But certainly we've arranged, for sometimes multiple board commissioners end up at the same event, and, we can notice those as ways to deal with the public meetings laws in association with that. So if there was something that, more than a few of you wanted to attend, more than a quorum of you wanted to attend, let us know, and we'll see how we can get that to work.
So have we wrapped that one up?
Yeah.
Or do you need something more from us?
That was perfect for me. Thank you so much
Thank
on
you.
this item.
Thanks, both of you. All right. Ms. Mardell, what have you got for us with regard to temporary hardship dwellings?
I have a very brief PowerPoint for you this evening, so I'll get that pulled up. All right. Good evening, Commissioners. For the record, Nicole Mardell, Senior Planner with Deschutes County Community Development. And this evening, I'm here to prepare you for a public hearing that will take place on March 13th related to a text amendment for temporary hardship dwellings. Wanted to kind of note, this is what we're calling like a housekeeping plus style amendment. So what you'll see in the code package that you've probably all already reviewed, done your homework. But a lot of this is just code cleanup. It's things like reorganizing this to be a little bit more clear, more readable to the average member of the general public. But then there are a couple policy choices here. So it's slightly more than kind of your standard housekeeping package. So the project website is found at bit.ly/2578-TA. Just to give you a bit of background on this topic, temporary hardship dwellings have been allowed since 1979 in Deschutes County. They've had a couple different names. You might recognize it as a temporary medical hardship dwelling or just a temporary medical residence. We have a couple different kind of names that we've used in the past. But overall, this type of use is intended to allow for temporary care of a resident or relative with a medical condition. So an example of this is having a parent aging in place. They've lived on a ranch their whole life, but they need medical care and they're not eligible for something like a relative farm help dwelling. So in this case, they're able to utilize an unused accessory structure or bring a manufactured home or an RV onto the property, and their kids could live on the property and provide care to them. Or vice versa, there could be a couple living in the MUA 10 zone on a property, and maybe their uncle or cousin runs into a medical issue and needs to receive care. They could live on the property in an RV and receive care from that property owner. So far, it's allowed as as I mentioned, as a manufactured home or an RV in our non-resource zones, but you can utilize an existing building in our EFU Forest 1 and Forest 2 zones. And that distinction really just comes from statute, but we will be kind of digging into allowing that in non-resource zones as part of this text amendment process. A renewal is required each year by submitting a doctor's note. So the temporary dwelling can remain as long as the medical condition is in place. You can also, if, for instance, your uncle's medical condition ends, you can change the occupant of the manufactured home or an RV to have a different relative be in that dwelling. But essentially, until that medical condition no longer exists, you can keep that temporary dwelling on the property as long as you need. There are some requirements for medical hardship dwellings in statute and administrative rule, but they're only for the resource zones. So they're only for farm and our forest zones. To our knowledge, there aren't any requirements spelled out in state law that are specific to non-resource zones. So it appears that over time, we've essentially tried to use some of the same requirements just for consistency. But it does look like we as the local jurisdiction do have some flexibility in that. We looked at some of the other counties in Oregon, and it looks like they follow the same process as well of having pretty similar regulations for both non-resource and resource zones. So some of the things that we've noticed since our medical hardship code was last updated kind of in a larger update in 2008 is that the state allowances are a bit more permissible than what we have in our code specifically for non-resource zones. So the code allows for, in addition to a medical condition, it allows for an aged person to be able to live on a property as part of a hardship dwelling. They don't define aged, but one could assume it's intended to be, an elderly family member. So maybe they don't have a specific medical condition that requires specific treatment, but maybe they're getting older and they just need some additional care. Also in state law, there was a change from renewal requirement of each year to provide that doctor's note to every 2 years. So a little bit more flexibility there. And state law also allows for a resident to be the person providing or receiving care, whereas our current code requires it to be a property owner. So let's say that you're renting a home, you wouldn't be eligible technically in our current code. So that's a change in state law that's a bit more permissive than what we have now. Generally, we require a temporary use permit for these in the non-resource zones. And I wanted to note that we do require some findings for the conditional use standards in the EFU and forest zones. That's prescribed by state law. kind of essentially the farm impacts test. So just noting that if you are placing this temporary medical hardship dwelling on the property, you aren't impacting negatively farming practices or forestry practices in the area. So it's a slight difference in the application review process between those today. So in terms of what we are proposing, as I mentioned, we're reorganizing some of the content for readability. We're amending some outdated references. These are pretty minor, but to give you an example, the code references subsurface sewer disposal systems. We call those on-site septic disposal systems, kind of things of that nature. So just a little bit of cleanup there. Also, we refer to a doctor's note, but of course, physicians, assistants, and nurse practitioners, they can provide these letters stating the medical condition, so doing some code cleanup there as well. We are clarifying through this proposal that the hardship dwelling can be for an aged person as well as an infirmed person, so providing that flexibility as allowed by statute. Amended the renewal requirements to 2 years as noted in statute, and clarified that resident eligibility piece that I mentioned earlier as well. And then wanted to note that we also clarified the existing building definition in the draft proposal before you. So currently in that resource zone, you're allowed to have a existing building be used for a hardship, but only if it has been in existence as of 2017. So in this case, and I'll go into this a little bit further, we kind of clarified that language and then again noted that you can utilize an existing building in a non-resource zone as well. We also added a disclaimer that hardship dwelling can be the only second dwelling on the property. So with the new allowances for ADUs in non-resource zones, guest houses, and RVs as rental dwellings, we wanted to avoid a situation that could be concerning regarding Goal 14, where you start stacking up additional dwellings on a property. So we wanted to make it very explicit to property owners. You really only get one of those items off the menu. So you could either get a temporary medical hardship dwelling or an RV as a rental dwelling, or a guest house or a ADU. And then last, we just amended the code are proposing to amend the code to just expressly list this in all the permissible zones. Right now we don't, so we've had some folks confused at our planning counter of, hey, is this allowed in, the Terrebonne residential zone or is it not? So just listed it explicitly where we do have a couple policy choices for the Planning Commission to consider at the public hearing. So some things for you to start thinking about. So as I noted, we have proposed a change to the existing building definition. So essentially the code currently requires that a existing building be one that was in existence as of March 29th, 2017. That date seems very specific. It's essentially the effective date from the last time we did a minor code update. So that's really why it's kind of listed there. It was just kind of based on when this ordinance went into effect. And in talking with our code enforcement division and our building division, they would prefer that it be a 2-year rolling basis for eligibility of an existing building. So that essentially is getting at avoiding a situation where someone's building a brand new structure for this temporary use. So we want to avoid someone building a brand new structure and then coming in the next day with a temporary use permit and saying, just kidding, I'm going to convert this into a residence. So instead having kind of at least 2 years from the date of final inspection, it shows that, someone already had this on the property and then they are going to use it for this temporary use and can convert it back to that non-residential accessory use after it's no longer needed. So that's a policy choice for the Planning Commission to consider if that seems, like a reasonable change. Second policy choice is related to restrictions on modifications of structures and also additions. So similar to kind of the previous item of ensuring that these are in fact temporary uses. Currently in our code, there's no restriction on modifying an existing building. So you technically could have a shed that's falling apart and you could come in with a building permit and say, I need to modify this for my temporary use permit and essentially build an entirely new second dwelling on your property. This would limit modifications to that of the existing floor area. So it's targeting things like, we see a lot of art studios, maybe a garage with living space above, man caves, she sheds. We kind of see all those types of things, allowing you to modify it to put in, proper wiring for a stove, a range, a refrigerator, washer, dryer, maybe adding, a closet or wall to separate this space, to make it more fit for care of a family member as a living space. But again, avoiding a situation where it's a permanent second dwelling on the property with something like a duplex. So that was suggested by our building division as well to address some of the issues that they've seen in the past. Last, kind of on this item, our code currently prohibits additions to RVs, and that's because you'll see someone kind of coming in with a pretty ramshackle kind of addition of living space that can be really dangerous, and cause some issues to the person living there or the person providing care. So we are proposing to keep that prohibition in place, but it is an option of the Planning Commission. If you felt that that were too restrictive, we could revisit that item. And then the last policy choice that we have for you relates to RV components. So currently our code has a variety of requirements to ensure that this is, fit for habitation, to avoid an RV being placed on the property that's, non-functional or falling apart. So there's a variety of requirements relating to highway readiness, being on wheels, being fully licensed. So we are proposing to keep those. But we are proposing to change the requirement for a bathroom to explicitly require a sink and a toilet. This came out of the RV as rental dwelling text amendment process, where it became clear that some RVs may not have a full shower. So ensuring that they have at least the basic hygienic facilities, but acknowledging that a relative could, go to the main dwelling to utilize a shower or larger bathroom space. So that's an option to make it more explicit, and we could add additional requirements as well, but that's kind of the bare minimum that was suggested by our Code Enforcement and Coordinated Services Division. And with that, wanted to note that we have not received any public comments to date. We did receive 2 agency comments. Redmond Fire, because this text amendment included some references to our forest zones, they asked if this were the time to open up some concerns they have regarding forest roads in compliance with Oregon Fire Code. We have known about some of these concerns in the past, but they are outside of the scope, we would say, of this amendment. So we just added it to our ongoing list of code amendments to pursue in the future, and they were comfortable with that. And our county transportation planner just noted that the proposal complies with Goal 12. There don't appear to be any major transportation impacts from this text amendment process. And with that, we have our public hearing on March 13th, and I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Great. Any questions? You have a question?
If possible. As I was reading this, as we talked about in our clear and objective standards discussion about how things might come up over the lifespan of that process, that came up for me in reading these text amendments when it was talking about family and defining who a family is versus in the clear and clear and present dangers in that clear and objective standards. I think that the term there is housekeeping unit as opposed to family, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
From my notes. So would this need to be in line with that language, or is it state statute that it is specifically related only to family as defined by that statute?
That's a great question, Commissioner. It's my understanding that, you're really referring to kind of the definition of relative. So in this case, in a temporary medical hardship dwelling or temporary hardship dwelling, you wouldn't be able to have a full family unit living in this. You'd only be able to have the person or persons with the medical condition. So relative shows essentially who's eligible for that. I was looking back at some recent decisions. Primarily, we only have one person staying in these dwelling units because that's the person who is receiving care. I've seen 1 or 2 examples where it's a couple where they both require medical care. But otherwise, we typically don't run into the same issue where we have to define what a family is because we have to put limitations on occupancy. So I would say that it is slightly different from clear and objective since the term relative is just talking about eligibility, not actually, kind of what the family unit is to be living in this dwelling. But I can take a look through Kyle's package and confirm.
May I ask a follow-up question?
Certainly.
So I guess I didn't mean a whole family unit living there. That to me is, my understanding is not that intention. I do understand that it would be for one person, but what if I had a best friend that I grew up with since I was born and she has no one else, and so I'm the only person who could take care of her or something like that. It's, technically we wouldn't be related, but
Yeah, that's a great.
it's a non-family person.
Yeah, we so just to make sure I'm understanding your question. So in item B under the text amendments in 18-116-90, this is actually already in our code, but we reconfirmed that it is the administrative rule definition that's used when it's referenced there. So it explicitly calls out that it's in item A above, it's noting that the medical hardship needs to be for the infirmed person by an existing resident or relative, and then relative notes kind of the exact parameters. So it has to be either by blood or legal relationship, a grandparent, step-grandparent, child, nephew, uncle, etc. So I believe that that's pretty clear from what we've seen in the past where we haven't really run into issue with folks trying to say, oh, we're like sisters. But I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything to that.
Glad to jump in here. So yeah, it is in fact defined in statute what constitutes a relative for the purpose of this. We have run into situations where under the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, where people have come and said, hey, we don't literally comply with this, but effectively, this person is my family. We live together, we care for each other, that kind of thing. And we have under circumstances recognized, outside of our code in a sort of a federal law variance like procedure to say, yes, you're equivalent for this purpose, that you're trying to provide this care and that, that this doesn't stretch the credulity of what the code was, the spirit of the law too far. So there is a process for people who don't exactly meet this. But if, for the clear and objective purposes, if you're one of these stated relatives, one of them we ran into that was kind of interesting was somebody's ex, that they were no longer married but they still were taking care of each other. And we had to route around that because it doesn't have a provision for kind of ex-kin. Yeah.
So Commissioner Williams?
So it states relative or resident. So kind of with respect to Commissioner Altman, could the resident property owner then move into the temporary dwelling and bring in a caretaker to live in their home to care for them?
Commissioner, that is an option, but the caretaker again would need to be a relative by our interpretation of the administrative rule.
Even if they lived in the primary residence.
Correct. Yeah. So either way, if you're living in the primary residence or the temporary residence, each of the folks living on that property would need to be relatives. So you would need to be related.
Okay, thank you.
Otherwise, they'd be living in the same dwelling.
Potentially.
Any other questions? Oh, Commissioner Altman.
Thank you, Chair. So if somebody had, let's say, like you mentioned a garage with a potential living space above, and they put in, this goes back to our previous discussion about a kitchen that Commissioner Kelly was talking about. So I'm assuming that if you have this dwelling, that a kitchen, some type of kitchen facilities would be part of it. If you do the wiring for that, as you mentioned, for washer and dryer, kitchen or something like that, it's from reading this, my understanding is that once that time period is over, you would have to take that out. I mean, you have to unwire your property, or what would you have to do if it's actually a pre-existing building that's on the property?
Yes. Yeah, so you need to decommission the use. So you would need to return it back to that accessory use. So, Will, you have been at the county for quite a long time. But yeah, we've had, quite a few discussions internally with our coordinated services division and code enforcement about this. So yeah, our intent would be that you can make modifications to the existing dwelling to make it more habitable for, someone to live there. But once that use is no longer needed, once the medical condition is no longer needed, you would need to decommission it within, I believe it's 90 days.
And we've, over time, it's not specified in state statute what decommissioning entails. And so, we've had situations where somebody said, normally we ask people to typically cap 220 wiring. We've had scenarios where people said, hey, yeah, my relative's leaving. I'm going to take the stove out, but this is going to be my pottery studio now, and I'm going to plug my kiln into the 220. So, we figure, we're really trying to make sure that, so the thing that you're watching on the other side of this that I need to point to is that, what happens is that, with some regularity, the person who has the medical hardship is sent to assisted living or, goes to live with a different relative, and people, either the original owner of the original creator of the medical hardship dwelling or some other person sees that there's two livable spaces and starts trying to rent it out or make a VRBO or sell it on the market as having two houses associated with it. And at some point, eventually that comes back to our attention. We say, no, this was a medical hardship dwelling specific to a person. Even if you, new owner, have a medical hardship, you need to come in and tell us about your relative status and your doctor's note. So really the thing that we're doing with this decommissioning is trying to make it so that, at least to the extent that we can track this, that we're not creating a lot of things that look like second dwellings to uninformed buyers at a later step.
So is there an inspection process to verify it was done, or just they're told to?
So right now what'll happen is it says that, within X days of it ending, you'll decommission it. And so what happens under the current setup is that you're required, as the holder of a medical hardship, to bring a doctor's note every 2 years that confirms that the medical condition still remains. And if those doctor's notes stop coming, we have our code enforcement process checks those periodically, calls and says, hey, where's your doctor's note? If the answer is like, oh, they moved to Florida, at that point, we would come back and say, okay, it's time to decommission this. So it's not an immediate check-in, but generally, at about, at maximally a 2-year lag, we're coming back in to check that people are either continuing the use or have decommissioned it in accordance with the approval conditions.
But is there an inspection process for the decommissioning itself?
Yes, because capping the 220 wiring requires a inspection process, for example.
And as soon as the inspector leaves, they put it back and rent it out
With some regularity.
Anything else? Oh, go ahead.
If you please. How many are there right now? Do you know how many temporary hardship dwellings there are? And have you seen an uptick in, as there's an aging population? Have you seen more requests for this?
Yeah, I can, but so I took a look through Excella, or kind of our land use records for this. So I didn't look at how many are in existence in total. I think that would be a pretty difficult exercise to run, but I just took a look at the last 2 years applications that have come in. So between February 2024 to February 2025, we had 6 for non-resource zones, 4 RVs, 2 manufactured homes. In resource zones, we had 4. 1 was an existing dwelling, 2 were manufactured homes, and 1 was a change in occupant. So that does happen. And in 2023 to 2024, we had 12. So 1 was in the non-resource zone, specifically that was 12. So we had 4 manufactured homes, 6 RVs, 1 change in occupant. And then we did have an ADA reasonable accommodation to allow use of an existing building, which is, a little bit, again, they received a special allowance for that. And for the resource zone in 2023 to 2024, and from February in each of both years, we had 1 existing building and 2 manufactured homes. So I would say it kind of depends. We get, I'd say, at least looks like 10 a year total. But are you familiar if we have a grand total in the county?
I was going to assume it'd be in the hundreds.
Oh,
So this is an answerable question because, our code enforcement department, tracks the number of doctor's notes they expect a year. So I don't know it off the top of my head, but this is a number we can bring back to you.
I'll just say off the cuff, I'd guess there's probably significantly more illegal ADUs than those who are complying with hardship dwellings.
Mhm. Definitely.
Just observations from responding to emergency calls.
Yeah, and certainly talking to realtors, similar observation of, that the first step in selling a house in the county is decommissioning without talking to the county your illegal dwelling that you put in something. Seems like there's a fair bit of that going on. And, of course, we take that seriously, and that's an important, that's one of the things as we talked about the ADU process, that, as those things are kind of pirated in over time, questions about the safety, evacuation ability, awareness of the fire department to be able to, have these things addressed correctly. Obviously something we want to keep track of, and I don't mean to make light of it, but it's interesting, the amount of effort that we put into putting in these systems and how much
You'd be surprised at how many places where there's a single address and multiple occupancies and finding the correct one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yikes.
Any other questions? Great, thank you. Any thoughts on what to expect for the hearing? Is there going to be a little short one with just a handful of people show up, if anybody, or a packed house?
It's always hard to know, Commissioner. We are sending out, the press release for the hearing to our county public information officer. So it will be posted on social media. It's already been posted in the Bend Bulletin. But with social media, maybe we could get some interest there, but we haven't received any public comments so far. So we will see.
Great, thank you. Anything else? Comments? Do you guys want to start? Do you have anything more?
Yeah, I can just very briefly, of course, March 13th coming up, and as we've mentioned, the medical hardship code update with Nicole's public hearing. Peter and I will be bringing you a work session on the annual work plan, so we'll be giving you a tour of that document. And in addition, it's anticipated that Tarek's going to be bringing you a work session on the clear and objective module for Title 17. That's partitions and subdivisions, and so that's one that it's many fewer pages than the previous one you engaged with. And really the meat of it comes down to that, when we allow subdivisions currently, there's a rule that says that they need to contribute to orderly development, which is completely clear and objective. So we, together with a consultant, tried to spell out what orderly development might look like by specifications and engineers' engagements and certifications from responding fire districts and things like that. So it'll be interesting to get your input on, and the public's input on that topic as we move through a work session and onto a hearing in the future. I also noted earlier, of course, that we're seeing an increase in load and at the same time a little bit of a uncertainty about the future in terms of what the total amount of work through planning's will come through. We've had some really interesting applications. Just light spoilers. The future include a proposal for an RV park in the south of Tumalo and a gas station in that area, and some text amendments. That, because it's directed to specific properties, would be routed through a hearings officer rather than through you. But that's an example of something that comes to our front desk with a check and moves to the front of the line and takes one of our planners off the field for a while. So a number of similar applications like that. Sun River Equestrian Center. Sun River Equestrian Center, they got a permission to build a new equestrian building, and they built it across the zone boundary into a different zone that didn't allow equestrian facilities. So working on a text amendment to patch that up. Real simple. Don't think there's any objectors to it, but just kind of these sorts of things that take up our time and keeping us quite busy. And I'll keep you posted on that. Right now, it's just, I think I've characterized it as the waters are rising, but nobody's drowning yet. So I'll keep you posted on how that's going.
And the equestrian facility text amendment is also quasi judicial, right? So
Yes.
that'll also go to a hearings officer.
Nicole?
Oh,
Did you have?
Yeah.
anything?
Oh, I think just a minor update. I think we had a question about the status of the comprehensive plan at the last meeting. So just wanted to note that I think I had mentioned we are kind of still in the middle of settling the record. That's been done. We received the petitioner's brief, so we're working essentially on our response now. So that's moving forward, and we'll hopefully have, additional updates at future meetings.
Great, thank you. Peter?
Two things. One, to Commissioner Williams, wanted to let everybody know that last week, the Board of County Commissioners on the consent calendar reappointed Commissioner Williams for a second 4-year term that is effective in July. So Commissioner Williams, congratulations, and we're excited to have you for obviously well past 4 years, but just a formality, but nonetheless something that worth celebrating. We appreciate your service and your leadership on the Planning Commission. And the only other piece that I had, at your next meeting, Will mentioned the work plan. I won't be here, but will lead that work session discussion. The hearing is then scheduled for your next meeting, which will be on March 27th. And then, all things being equal, passes any indication, deliberations and a recommendation would be anticipated. This is my crystal ball at the following meeting, which is your first meeting in April, on April 10th. So the work plan is on its way, and obviously relevant topics today from a citizen, the panel conversation that you both had with Will, I think is excellent to identify, I think, to prioritize those panel topics that you can do in April, and an excellent suggestion by Chair Cyrus, to the extent that our staff can stay that nimble when we can anticipate a softening in the schedule, working with the Planning Commission to get you those panels organized and then broadcasted for public participation, certainly for input. And one of the things that you may want to think about as well, not to revisit that now at the conclusion of the meeting, but Will's memo was excellent, just as staff has been thinking about how to maximize those panels, how to summarize the content. There's ideas about how we can do that almost in like a Cliff Notes fashion, so we can be nimble, knowing that these topics are so important, and then the information to get it distributed to those that want it. So we've been thinking about it, do so as well, and we look forward to your input and recommendations, starting in March and really in April. So thank you so much for your time tonight. I thought a very constructive meeting, and it's good to see all of you with all the technology. Thanks to Adam and our IT team for kicking the monitors. You missed all of that. The 4 of you that are remote, there was a lot of, I'm kidding, but figuratively, there was a lot of levers turned to get those monitors working. So it's great to see all of you, and we look forward to a healthy and hearty spring with all of you. So thanks again.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Stopkamp.
No comment.
Commissioner Kelly.
Just thanks for another good, productive meeting.
Yes, thanks all, no comment. Look forward to seeing you in person next meeting.
Yeah, Commissioner Williams.
Want to thank everyone. Gutowski, appreciate the coverage of the South County water issue. And Commissioner Kelly, I do understand housing and affordable housing is definitely a bullet point right now, and appreciate everyone in person, and we will see you in a couple of weeks.
Commissioner Karas.
Yeah, thanks for a great discussion. I appreciate you, everybody, all of you guys.
Vice Chair Altman. Great, and I don't have anything other than thank everybody for a good meeting. Thank you.
Have to call complete.